The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured gardens of Kensington Palace when Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell received the call that would change everything. 3 words crackled through a radio that sent chills down her spine. Princess Charlotte targeted. In a world where royal security was considered impenetrable, someone had managed to breach the most protected perimeter in Britain. But this wasn't just another security incident. This was the beginning of a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government, involving a disgraced former royal guard whose thirst for revenge would shake the very foundations of the monarchy. What started as a routine morning walk in the palace gardens would spiral into a deadly game of cat and mouse, where loyalties would be tested, secrets would be exposed, and one man's obsession would threaten to destroy everything the royal family held dear. The question wasn't just who wanted to harm Princess Charlotte. It was how far they were willing to go to succeed. The crisp October air carried the scent of autumn leaves as Princess Charlotte walked through the private gardens of Kensington Palace, her small hand nestled safely in her nanny's grip. At 7 years old, she was blissfully unaware of the 3 armed protection officers who maintained a discreet 20-meter perimeter around her every movement. The morning routine was sacred in the royal household. 30 minutes of fresh air before breakfast, a tradition that had been followed for generations. Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell stood at her post near the west gate, her trained eyes scanning the horizon while maintaining radio contact with the Central Command. She had been part of the Royal Protection Unit for 8 years, and in that time, she had never encountered anything more threatening than an overeager photographer or a confused tourist. The tranquility of the palace grounds had always provided a false sense of security, but Sarah knew better than to let her guard down. All clear from the north perimeter came the voice of Sergeant James Crawford through her earpiece. Sarah acknowledged the report while watching Princess Charlotte chase a butterfly near the rose garden. The little girl's laughter echoed through the morning air, a sound that reminded Sarah why her job mattered so much. Protecting innocence wasn't just a duty, it was a calling. Marcus Webb crouched behind the maintenance shed, his heart pounding against his ribs as he watched the familiar scene unfold. Once, he had been the one standing guard, proud to wear the uniform of the Royal Protection Unit. Now, 18 months after his dismissal, he was nothing more than a ghost haunting the perimeters of the place he once called home. His hands trembled as he adjusted the scope on his rifle, not from fear, but from the overwhelming rage that had consumed his life. The dismissal had been swift and brutal. One moment he was a decorated officer with 12 years of faithful service. The next he was stripped of his badge and escorted from the palace grounds like a common criminal. The official reason was conduct unbecoming of an officer, but Marcus knew the truth. He had discovered something he wasn't supposed to see, something that powerful people wanted to keep buried. 6 months earlier, Marcus had stumbled upon classified documents during a routine security sweep. The papers revealed a secret agreement between certain members of Parliament and foreign investors, a deal that would have compromised British national security. When he reported his findings to his superiors, he expected to be commended for his vigilance. Instead, he found himself under investigation for alleged theft and insubordination. The character assassination was swift and thorough. Suddenly, his military record meant nothing. His years of dedicated service were forgotten. Even his wife, Rebecca, began to doubt him as the rumors spread through their social circle like wildfire. She left him 3 months after his dismissal, taking their 8-year-old daughter, Emma, with her. The restraining order came 2 weeks later, ensuring that Marcus couldn't even say goodbye to his own child. As he watched Princess Charlotte play in the garden, Marcus felt a twisted sense of justice. The royal family represented everything that had been taken from him: security, respect, and a future. If he couldn't have his daughter back, if he couldn't clear his name, then perhaps he could make them understand what it felt like to lose everything. Sarah noticed the glint of sunlight reflecting off something metallic near the maintenance area. Her training kicked in immediately, and she spoke calmly in her radio while beginning to move toward Princess Charlotte's location. Possible threat identified. West Maintenance Sector. All units converge on Princess location. Maintain calm appearance. The response was immediate and professional. Within seconds, the protection team had formed a human shield around Princess Charlotte, gently but firmly guiding her toward the palace entrance. The little girl protested, wanting to continue playing, but her nanny distracted her with promises of hot chocolate and biscuits. Marcus realized his window of opportunity was closing rapidly. The protection team was too well trained, too coordinated. He had underestimated their response time, a mistake that would cost him the element of surprise he desperately needed. As he watched the officers escort Princess Charlotte to safety, his finger tightened on the trigger of his rifle. The shot echoed across the palace grounds like thunder, shattering the peaceful morning calm. Sarah felt the bullet whistle past her ear as she threw herself between the shooter's position and Princess Charlotte's retreating form. Glass exploded from a nearby window, and chaos erupted as the protection team activated full emergency protocols. Shots fired! Shots fired! Sarah screamed into her radio while drawing her service weapon. Princess is secure. Repeat, Princess is secure. Shooter located in West Maintenance Area. Armed response units poured onto the scene from every direction, their black tactical gear a stark contrast to the colorful autumn foliage. The palace grounds, moments before a picture of serenity, now resembled a war zone as officers established a perimeter around the maintenance building. Marcus knew he had failed. The single shot he had managed to fire had missed its target, and now he was surrounded by the most elite security force in Britain. But as he prepared to make his final stand, he realized that this was never really about Princess Charlotte. She was just a symbol, a way to strike at the heart of the institution that had destroyed his life. His radio crackled to life with a familiar voice, one he hadn't heard since his dismissal. "Hello, Marcus. This is Commander Phillips. I know you can hear me. Let's talk about this like civilized men." Commander Phillips had been Marcus's mentor, the man who had recruited him into the Royal Protection Unit more than a decade ago. Their relationship had been like father and son, built on mutual respect and shared dedication to the crown. Phillips's betrayal during the investigation had cut deeper than any of the other accusations Marcus had faced. "There's nothing to talk about, Commander," Marcus replied through his own radio, which he had kept as a memento of his former life. "You all made your choice when you threw me away like garbage. Now you get to live with the consequences." The standoff stretched through the morning hours as negotiators tried to establish meaningful communication with Marcus. Meanwhile, the palace had gone into complete lockdown, with every member of the royal family secured in safe rooms while the crisis unfolded. The media had caught wind of the situation, and news helicopters circled overhead like vultures waiting for their story to break. Sarah remained on the scene, providing crucial intelligence about the shooter's position and possible motivations. She had served alongside Marcus for 5 years and knew him to be a skilled marksman and tactician. If he wanted to drag this out, he certainly had the training and determination to make it a long day for everyone involved. As afternoon turned to evening, Marcus began to realize that his plan had fundamentally flawed from the beginning. He had been so consumed with revenge that he hadn't considered what would happen after he pulled the trigger. There was no escape route, no exit strategy, and no realistic chance of achieving anything meaningful through violence. The truth was he missed his old life. He missed the camaraderie with his fellow officers, the sense of purpose that came with protecting something greater than himself, and, most of all, he missed being a man his daughter could be proud of. Sitting alone in the maintenance shed, surrounded by hostile forces, Marcus finally began to understand what he had become. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. When he opened it, his blood ran cold. It was a photo of his daughter Emma, taken recently at her new school. She was smiling and playing with friends, looking happy and healthy. The message that followed was simple but clear. Some things are more important than revenge. Think about what Emma needs from her father. Marcus stared at the photo for a long time, his rifle forgotten at his feet. The little girl in the image looked so much like Princess Charlotte, innocent, trusting, and deserving of protection rather than violence. For the first time in 18 months, Marcus began to question whether his thirst for revenge was worth destroying what little remained of his relationship with his daughter. The sun was setting over Kensington Palace when Marcus finally emerged from the maintenance shed, his hands raised in surrender. The tactical teams moved in quickly and professionally, securing him without incident. As the handcuffs clicked into place, Marcus looked up at the palace windows where Princess Charlotte might be watching, and he whispered an apology that no one would ever hear. Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell watched as Marcus was led away, feeling a complex mix of relief and sadness. She had helped prevent a tragedy, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Men like Marcus Webb didn't act alone, and his intimate knowledge of palace security procedures suggested that this attack was just the beginning of something much larger and more dangerous. The interrogation room at Scotland Yard was sterile and cold, its concrete walls painted an institutional shade of beige that seemed designed to break down psychological defenses. Marcus Webb sat across from Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell and Commander Phillips, his wrists still bearing the red marks from the handcuffs that had been removed only moments before. The fluorescent lights overhead cast harsh shadows across his face, making him appear older than his 42 years. Sarah studied Marcus carefully as she reviewed his file. His military record was impeccable, decorated service in Afghanistan, expert marksman qualifications, and a series of commendations for bravery under fire. His transition to the Royal Protection Unit had been seamless, with performance reviews that consistently rated him as one of their most reliable officers. The man sitting before her seemed like a completely different person from the one described in these official documents. "You want to tell us why you threw away everything you worked for?" Commander Phillips asked, his voice carrying the weight of personal disappointment. He had recruited Marcus personally, vouching for his character and potential. The betrayal cut both ways, and Phillips struggled to reconcile the man he thought he knew with the one who had pointed a rifle at Princess Charlotte. Marcus remained silent for several minutes, his eyes fixed on a spot on the table between them. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "You really want to know? Or are you just going through the motions before you lock me up and throw away the key?" "We want the truth," Sarah said firmly. "All of it. Starting with why you were really dismissed from the protection unit." The laugh that escaped Marcus was bitter and hollow. "The truth? You can't handle the truth. None of you can. That's why we're sitting here instead of going after the real criminals." Phillips leaned forward, his patience wearing thin. "Stop playing games, Marcus. You aimed a rifle at a 7-year-old girl. Nothing justifies that, regardless of whatever grievances you think you have." "I never intended to hurt Charlotte," Marcus said, and for the first time, genuine emotion crept into his voice. "She's an innocent child." But Sometimes innocent people get caught in the crossfire when the system protects the guilty. Sarah exchanged a glance with Phillips before pulling out a thick file folder. These are the documents you allegedly stole from the palace archives, the ones that led to your dismissal. Want to tell us what was so important about them that you were willing to destroy your career? Marcus looked at the folder with a mixture of surprise and suspicion. He had assumed those documents were buried so deep that no one would ever see them again. You actually kept them? I thought they would have been shredded the moment I was out of the building. We keep everything, Phillips said, even evidence of crimes that were never officially reported. The admission hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus realized that this interrogation was not going the way he had expected. Instead of being treated like a simple criminal, he was being given an opportunity to present his case. The question was whether he could trust them with the truth after 18 months of being branded a liar and a thief. Those documents proved that certain members of Parliament were selling classified defense information to foreign buyers. Marcus said slowly, testing their reaction. Not just any information, detailed specifications about royal security protocols, including emergency evacuation procedures and safe room locations. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. If Marcus was telling the truth, then the attack on Princess Charlotte wasn't an isolated incident by a disgruntled former employee. It was part of a larger conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government. Who specifically was involved? Lord Pemberton was the primary contact, Marcus said. He had gambling debts that ran into the millions, and someone offered him a way out. The buyers were connected to a terrorist organization that had been planning an attack on the royal family for years. Phillips shook his head in disbelief. Lord Pemberton sits on the Defense Committee. He has access to some of our most sensitive national security information. If what you're saying is true, then we're dealing with treason at the highest level. When I reported my findings to my superiors, I expected them to launch an immediate investigation, Marcus continued. Instead, I found myself under suspicion. My computer was confiscated, my security clearance was revoked, and I was accused of fabricating evidence for personal gain. Why would they cover it up instead of investigating? Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Because Lord Pemberton wasn't acting alone, Marcus replied. The conspiracy included people within our own organization, people who had been feeding information to him for months. When I stumbled onto their operation, they decided it was easier to destroy my credibility than to risk exposure. The interrogation was interrupted by a knock on the door. A junior officer entered and whispered something urgent in Phillips's ear. The commander's face went pale as he listened, and he immediately excused himself from the room. Sarah was left alone with Marcus, who watched the exchange with growing concern. What do you think that was about? Marcus asked. Before Sarah could respond, Phillips returned with a grim expression. We just received word that Lord Pemberton was found dead in his study an hour ago. Apparent suicide, with a note confessing to selling state secrets. Marcus felt a mixture of vindication and dread. He didn't kill himself. Whoever was running this operation just cleaned up a loose end. And if they're willing to murder a member of Parliament, then everyone involved in this investigation is now a target. The gravity of the situation began to sink in for Sarah and Phillips. If Marcus was telling the truth, then they weren't just dealing with a failed assassination attempt. They were uncovering a conspiracy that was still active and dangerous. The people behind it had already proven they were willing to kill to protect their secrets. We need to get you into protective custody, Phillips said to Marcus. If you're right about this being bigger than just Pemberton, then your life is in danger. My life has been in danger since the moment I discovered those documents, Marcus replied. "Why do you think I was living off the grid for the past 6 months? These people don't leave witnesses." Sarah pulled out her phone and began making calls to arrange for Marcus to be moved to a secure location. As she spoke with various departments, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The conspiracy Marcus described would require extensive resources and inside information to operate successfully. How many people within their own organization might be compromised? The answer came sooner than expected. As they prepared to move Marcus to a safe house, Sarah noticed that their route had been predetermined by someone higher up the chain of command. The location, timing, and security protocols were all being coordinated by people who would have access to the same information that had been leaked to Lord Pemberton. "We can't trust anyone," she whispered to Phillips during a brief moment when they were alone. "If Marcus is right about inside involvement, then moving him through official channels could be a death sentence." Phillips nodded grimly. "I've been thinking the same thing. We need to go off the books for this one." They developed a plan to secretly move Marcus using Sarah's personal vehicle while making it appear that he was being transported through normal channels. A decoy van would take the official route while they slipped away through the back exit of Scotland Yard. It was a risky gambit, but it seemed like their only option for keeping Marcus alive long enough to expose the full scope of the conspiracy. As they prepared to leave, Marcus pulled Sarah aside. "There's something else you need to know. The attack on Princess Charlotte today wasn't supposed to happen. I was acting alone, outside of any organization. But the real attack, the one they've been planning for months, is still coming." "What kind of attack?" Sarah asked. "They call it Operation Crownfall," Marcus said. "The goal is to eliminate multiple members of the royal family simultaneously during a public event. They have detailed intelligence about security procedures, and they've been positioning assets for months." "When?" Phillips demanded. "The state dinner next week," Marcus replied. "It's the perfect target. Multiple royals in one location, international media coverage, and enough chaos to mask their escape." Sarah felt her blood run cold. The state dinner was one of the most prestigious events on the royal calendar, with heads of state from around the world in attendance. If terrorists succeeded in carrying out an attack during such a high-profile event, the political and social ramifications would be devastating. "We have 6 days to stop them," Phillips said grimly. "And we can't trust our own organization to help us do it." As they prepared to leave Scotland Yard through the service entrance, Sarah couldn't help but wonder if they were already too late. The conspiracy that Marcus had uncovered was clearly more sophisticated and far-reaching than any of them had initially realized. The people behind it had successfully eliminated Lord Pemberton and had been operating undetected within the highest levels of government for months. The drive through London's evening traffic was tense and silent. Marcus sat in the back seat, constantly checking the mirrors for signs of pursuit. Sarah navigated through side streets and back alleys, avoiding the main thoroughfares where they might be spotted by surveillance cameras or hostile forces. Their destination was a small, safe house in South London that Phillips had used for unofficial operations in the past. It wasn't part of any official database, and only a handful of people knew of its existence. As they pulled into the narrow alley behind the building, all three of them breathed a small sigh of relief. Inside the safe house, they began to plan their next moves. Marcus provided detailed information about the security vulnerabilities that had been exposed to the conspirators, while Sarah and Phillips worked to identify trustworthy allies within law enforcement and the intelligence community. The task ahead of them seemed overwhelming. They needed to identify and neutralize a sophisticated terrorist cell, expose a conspiracy that reached into Parliament, and protect the royal family from an attack that was just 6 days away. And they had to do it all while staying one step ahead of their own compromised organization. The safe house in South London was a cramped two-bedroom flat that smelled of stale cigarettes and instant coffee. Peeling wallpaper and mismatched furniture made it clear that comfort was not a priority in this location. Sarah Mitchell spread intelligence files across the small dining table, while Commander Phillips worked his contacts through encrypted phone calls. Marcus Webb sat by the window, his trained eyes scanning the street below for any sign of surveillance. 3 days had passed since Lord Pemberton's suspicious death, and their investigation had revealed the true scope of Operation Crownfall. The conspiracy involved at least 7 members of Parliament, 3 high-ranking military officers, and an unknown number of operatives within the Royal Protection Service. The terrorist organization funding the operation was called the New Britannia Movement, a radical group that believed the monarchy was a corrupt institution that needed to be destroyed to save Britain. "I've identified the key players," Sarah announced, pointing to photographs arranged on the table. "In addition to the late Lord Pemberton, we have Defense Secretary William Hartley, Colonel James Morrison from Military Intelligence, and Senator Patricia Walsh from the Home Office. They've been meeting secretly for 6 months, always in different locations to avoid detection." Phillips ended his latest phone call with a frustrated sigh. "My contact at MI5 confirms that someone has been accessing classified files about the state dinner security arrangements. The breach happened 3 weeks ago, which means they have detailed information about every aspect of the event." Marcus turned from the window, his face grim. "They know the locations of the security checkpoints, the emergency evacuation routes, and the identities of every protection officer assigned to the event. Worse than that, they probably know which officers they've managed to compromise." The state dinner was scheduled for the following evening at Buckingham Palace. Representatives from 12 nations would be in attendance, including the President of the United States and the Prime Minister of France. The event would be broadcast live to millions of viewers around the world, making it the perfect stage for a spectacular terrorist attack. "We need to warn the palace," Sarah said, "even if it means blowing our cover and risking exposure." "Warning them won't be enough," Phillips replied. "If the conspiracy reaches as high as we suspect, then our warning might be dismissed or suppressed by people who are part of the plot. We need concrete evidence that can't be ignored." Marcus had been studying the intelligence files for hours, looking for patterns and connections that might reveal the terrorists' specific plan of attack. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a series of maintenance requests for Buckingham Palace. "Someone has been making modifications to the palace infrastructure over the past month. New electrical work, updated security systems, and repairs to the kitchen ventilation system." Sarah examined the documents more closely. These requests were all approved by the same person, Deputy Security Chief Robert Thornton. But, according to his schedule, he was supposedly on vacation when these approvals were made. "Thornton has been compromised," Phillips said grimly. "Or he's been dead for weeks, and someone has been using his credentials to gain access to the palace." The realization that the conspiracy had penetrated so deeply into the palace security structure was sobering. If they couldn't trust the people responsible for protecting the royal family, then traditional security measures would be useless against the coming attack. Marcus pulled out a hand-drawn floor plan of Buckingham Palace that he had memorized during his years of service. "If I were planning an attack on the state dinner, I would focus on 3 key areas: the state dining room where the meal will be served, the music room where the guests will gather for speeches, and the grand staircase, which is the primary evacuation route." "How would you do it?" Sarah asked, knowing that understanding the attack plan was crucial to preventing it. "Explosives planted during the maintenance work would be the most effective," Marcus replied. "Positioned correctly, they could bring down large sections of the building and eliminate most of the targets simultaneously. The terrorists wouldn't even need to be in the palace during the attack. They could trigger the explosives remotely. Philip stood up abruptly and began pacing the small room. We can't evacuate the entire palace without alerting the conspirators that we're onto them. And we can't search for explosives without proper authorization, which we can't get because we don't know who to trust. There might be another way, Marcus said slowly. I still have contacts within the palace staff, people who worked with me for years, and no, I would never betray the royal family. If I could get a message to them, they might be able to help us identify the planted explosives. Sarah shook her head immediately. Absolutely not. The moment you show up at Buckingham Palace, you'll be arrested for the assassination attempt. Even if some people believe you're innocent, the official position is that you're a dangerous criminal. Then, we'll have to find another way to get inside, Marcus said. What about the service tunnels? I helped design the security protocols for those areas, and I know how to access them without triggering the alarm systems. The service tunnels beneath Buckingham Palace were a closely guarded secret, known only to the highest levels of the security apparatus. They provided emergency access routes and utility connections for the palace, but they were also potential security vulnerabilities if compromised. Marcus's knowledge of these tunnels could provide them with a way to conduct a covert search for explosives. The state dinner begins at 7 o'clock tomorrow evening, Philip said, checking his watch. We have less than 18 hours to identify and neutralize whatever devices the terrorists have planted. Even if we find them, we'll need explosives disposal experts who we can trust completely. Sarah had been thinking about their limited options and the enormous risks they were taking. What if we're wrong? What if there is no attack and we're just chasing shadows based on the paranoid theories of a disgraced former officer? The question hung in the air for several moments before Marcus responded. Then I spend the rest of my life in prison for attempted assassination, and you two face court-martial for going rogue. But if we're right and we do nothing, then dozens of innocent people will die tomorrow night. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of vehicles pulling up outside the safe house. Phillips peered through the curtains and saw 3 black SUVs positioned to block any escape routes. Armed figures in tactical gear were already moving toward the building's entrances. They found us, he said grimly. Everyone out the back now. The trio moved quickly through the rear of the safe house, grabbing only the essential intelligence files as they fled. The sound of splintering wood and shouted commands filled the air behind them as the tactical team breached the front door. Sarah led them through a narrow alley that connected to the underground railway system, a route she had scouted during their first night in the safe house. As they descended into the tunnels beneath London, Marcus couldn't help but admire the professional efficiency of the team that had tracked them down. These aren't regular police, he observed. That was a military-style operation with classified intelligence support. The conspiracy runs deeper than we thought, Phillips replied as they navigated through the dark tunnels. They have resources within multiple agencies and the authority to deploy tactical teams without normal oversight. Their escape through the underground system took them across the city to another safe location, an abandoned warehouse in East London that Phillips had used for covert operations during his early career. It was far from luxurious, but it was off the grid and unknown to current intelligence databases. We need to assume that our phones, credit cards, and official identification are all being tracked, Sarah said as they settled into their new hiding place. From now on, we're completely on our own. Marcus looked at his companions with a mixture of gratitude and concern. Both Sarah and Phillips had risked their careers and possibly their lives to help him expose this conspiracy. If they failed, all 3 of them would face serious criminal charges and professional destruction. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "You could have turned me over to the authorities and gone back to your normal lives." Phillips considered the question for a moment before responding. "Because I've spent 30 years protecting the crown, and I'll be damned if I let a group of traitors destroy everything we've worked to build. The monarchy isn't perfect, but it represents something greater than any individual, tradition, stability, and the continuity of our national identity." Sarah nodded in agreement. "And because Princess Charlotte deserves the chance to grow up safe and protected, just like every other child in this country. If we let the terrorists succeed, we're not just failing the royal family. We're failing everyone who believes in justice and the rule of law." With less than 12 hours remaining before the state dinner, they began to plan their infiltration of Buckingham Palace. Marcus sketched out the service tunnel system from memory, identifying the optimal entry points and the most likely locations for planted explosives. Sarah worked on creating false identification that would allow them to access the areas they needed to search. Phillips used his remaining contacts to gather intelligence about the security arrangements for the following evening. The plan they developed was desperate and dangerous, requiring them to slip past multiple security checkpoints while searching for explosives that could be anywhere within the vast palace complex. If they were caught, they would be treated as terrorists themselves. But if they succeeded, they might prevent one of the most devastating attacks in British history. As dawn broke over London, the three unlikely allies prepared for what could be their final mission together. The fate of the monarchy and possibly the stability of the entire government rested in their hands. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the grounds of Buckingham Palace as distinguished guests began arriving for the state dinner. Limousines bearing diplomatic flags lined the forecourt while photographers captured images of presidents, prime ministers, and royalty stepping onto the red carpet. Inside the palace, the final preparations for what would either be a triumphant celebration of international diplomacy or a devastating terrorist attack were reaching their crescendo. 3 miles away, in the abandoned warehouse that had become their command center, Sarah Mitchell, Commander Phillips, and Marcus Webb made their final preparations for the most dangerous mission of their careers. The intelligence they had gathered over the past 4 days painted a terrifying picture of the conspiracy they were facing, and time was running out to prevent Operation Crown Fall from succeeding. Marcus studied the updated palace blueprints one last time, memorizing every detail of their infiltration route. The service tunnel entrance beneath Westminster Bridge connect to the palace utilities network through a series of maintenance passages. If we can access those tunnels without triggering the automated security systems, we should be able to reach the target areas undetected. Sarah finished assembling their makeshift equipment: bolt cutters, electronic detection devices, and emergency communication gear that Phillips had acquired through unofficial channels. The explosives disposal kit is minimal, but it should be enough to disarm basic devices if we find them. The real challenge will be identifying the bombs without proper scanning equipment. Phillips received a final intelligence update through his encrypted phone. The guest list is confirmed: 12 heads of state, including the American president and the French prime minister. The dinner begins at 7 o'clock, followed by speeches in the music room at 9. If the terrorists are planning maximum impact, they'll wait until all the guests are gathered together. The weight of responsibility was enormous. If they failed to find and disable the explosive devices, dozens of world leaders and members of the royal family would die in what would be remembered as one of the most devastating terrorist attacks in history. The political consequences would reshape international relations for decades, and the British monarchy might not survive the scandal and security failures that would inevitably follow. "There's still time to call this off," Sarah said, giving her companions one last opportunity to reconsider their desperate plan. "We could contact MI5 and hope that someone there believes us enough to order a full evacuation." Marcus shook his head firmly. "The conspiracy reaches too deep into the intelligence community. Any warning we give through official channels will be intercepted and suppressed. By the time the truth comes out, it will be too late." Phillips checked his watch and stood up. "The dinner service begins in 2 hours. If we're going to do this, we need to move now." They left the warehouse separately, using different routes to reach their rendezvous point near Westminster Bridge. The London evening was busy with commuters and tourists, providing excellent cover for their movements. None of them carried identification or weapons that would attract attention if they were stopped by police, but they all knew that their faces were probably being circulated through security databases as wanted fugitives. The entrance to the service tunnels was hidden beneath a maintenance cover near the Thames embankment. Marcus had discovered this access point during his years as a protection officer, when he was responsible for conducting security sweeps of all possible infiltration routes. The irony that he was now using this knowledge to break into the palace was not lost on him. The automated sensors extend 50 meters into the tunnel system, Marcus whispered as they descended into the darkness. "After that, we'll be relying on visual inspection and manual security measures that haven't been updated in years." The tunnels were narrow, damp, and filled with the mechanical sounds of the palace's infrastructure systems. Water pipes, electrical conduits, and ventilation ducts ran along the walls and ceiling, creating a maze of potential hiding places for explosive devices. Their flashlights cut through the darkness as they made their way toward the palace foundations. Sarah moved carefully behind Marcus, following his lead through the complex tunnel system. Her police training had included basic explosives recognition, but she was far from an expert in bomb disposal. If they found sophisticated devices, they would need to rely on Marcus's military experience and hope that his knowledge was sufficient to prevent a catastrophic detonation. Phillips brought up the rear, maintaining radio contact with their emergency backup plan. If they failed to check in within 3 hours, he had arranged for a trusted contact to deliver evidence of the conspiracy to the BBC and The Guardian simultaneously. It wouldn't prevent the attack, but it would ensure that the truth eventually came to light. After 20 minutes of careful navigation, they reached the junction that connected to the palace's main electrical system. Marcus immediately noticed signs of recent disturbance, fresh tool marks on the access panels, and new cable connections that didn't appear on any of the official blueprints. "Someone's been here recently," he whispered, examining the unauthorized modifications. These electrical connections lead directly to the state dining room and the music room. If I were placing explosive devices, this would be the perfect distribution point. Sarah began photographing the suspicious installations with a small digital camera, creating evidence that could be used later to identify the perpetrators. The sophistication of the work was impressive. Whoever had made these modifications clearly had extensive knowledge of the palace's electrical systems and access to professional equipment. They followed the new cables through a series of utility passages, marking each suspicious modification as they discovered it. The pattern that emerged was chilling in its thoroughness. The terrorists had spent months preparing for this attack, creating multiple redundant systems to ensure that their explosives would detonate even if some of the devices were discovered. "There," Marcus said, pointing to a large electrical junction box that had been recently modified. "That's the main control point. The explosives are probably positioned throughout the target areas, but they're all connected through this central switching system." Phillips examined the device, while Sarah kept watch for any signs of palace security personnel. It's a remote detonation system with multiple triggering mechanisms: radio frequency, cellular signal, and hardwired timer backup. Even if we disable two of the systems, the third could still set off the explosives. The complexity of the bomb network was beyond their ability to safely disarm without proper equipment and training. They needed help from someone with advanced explosives expertise, but calling official bomb disposal teams would alert the conspirators and potentially trigger an immediate detonation. "Wait," Marcus said suddenly, remembering something from his military service. "During my deployment in Afghanistan, we worked with a demolitions expert named Captain Jennifer Hayes. She left the Army 2 years ago and now works as a private security consultant in London. If anyone can help us disarm this system safely, it's her." Sarah was skeptical about involving another person at this late stage. How do we know she can be trusted? And how do we contact her without exposing our location? "Jenny saved my life 3 times in Afghanistan," Marcus replied. "She's one of the most honorable people I've ever known, and she has the technical expertise we need. I have her emergency contact information memorized." Phillips made the decision to reach out to Captain Hayes, using a secure phone to contact her through an encrypted messaging service. The conversation was brief but urgent, with Phillips providing just enough information to convince her that lives were at stake and her specialized skills were desperately needed. Captain Jennifer Hayes arrived at the tunnel entrance 40 minutes later, carrying a professional bomb disposal kit and asking no questions about why she was being asked to conduct an illegal operation beneath Buckingham Palace. Her reputation for discretion and competence had made her one of the most sought-after security consultants in Europe. "Show me what we're dealing with," she said simply as she joined them in the tunnel system. Marcus led her to the main control junction, explaining what they had discovered about the explosive network and the remote detonation systems. Captain Hayes examined the devices with professional calm, using specialized scanning equipment to map the electrical connections and identify the locations of individual explosive charges. "This is extremely sophisticated work," she reported after completing her initial assessment. "The devices are positioned to bring down the entire east wing of the palace, including the state dining room, the music room, and the grand staircase. The explosive charges are connected through a distributed network that would be almost impossible to detect through normal security sweeps." "Can you disarm them?" Sarah asked. Captain Hayes was quiet for several long moments as she considered their options. "The main control system has multiple safeguards and anti-tampering devices. If I try to disarm it directly, there's a significant chance of triggering an immediate detonation. However, I might be able to introduce signal interference that would prevent the remote detonation systems from receiving their activation commands." The plan she outlined was technically complex, but offered their best chance of preventing the attack without triggering the explosives prematurely. By introducing electromagnetic interference at specific frequencies, she could disrupt the radio and cellular communication systems while leaving the hardwired timer mechanism intact. This would give them time to evacuate the palace through unofficial channels while preventing the terrorists from detonating their devices remotely. "How long will the interference last?" Phillips asked. 6 to 8 hours, depending on atmospheric conditions and the terrorists' ability to adapt their transmission frequencies, Captain Hayes replied. "After that, they'll probably switch to the timer backup system, so you'll need to clear the palace and call in official bomb disposal teams." As she began setting up the interference equipment, the sound of footsteps echoed through the tunnel system. Phillips immediately extinguished their flashlights and motioned for complete silence. The footsteps were getting closer, accompanied by the crackling sound of radio communications. "Security sweep in progress," came a voice from the darkness. Sector 7 clear, moving to Sector 8. They had been discovered, whether through random patrol or specific intelligence. Palace security was conducting a sweep of the tunnel system. If they were caught here with bomb disposal equipment, they would be treated as terrorists and probably shot on sight. Marcus made a quick decision that would change everything. He stepped out of the shadows with his hands raised, calling out to the security team in a clear, authoritative voice. "This is former Protection Officer Marcus Webb. I need to speak with Commander Phillips immediately. Lives depend on it." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Tactical lights flooded the tunnel as armed officers surrounded them, weapons drawn, and voices shouting conflicting commands. In the chaos of the confrontation, Captain Hayes managed to complete the activation of her interference system, sending an electromagnetic pulse through the tunnel network that would disrupt the terrorist communication systems for the next several hours. The confrontation in the tunnel system lasted only minutes, but those minutes felt like hours to everyone involved. Armed palace security officers had surrounded Marcus Webb, Sarah Mitchell, Commander Phillips, and Captain Jennifer Hayes, their weapons trained on the group they had caught conducting unauthorized activities beneath Buckingham Palace. The electromagnetic interference device that Captain Hayes had activated hummed quietly in the background, its signal disrupting terrorist communications throughout the palace complex. "Stand down immediately," shouted Security Chief David Morrison, his voice echoing through the narrow tunnel. "You are all under arrest for trespassing on royal property and suspected terrorist activities." Marcus kept his hands raised while speaking in a calm, measured tone. "Chief Morrison, I know how this looks, but you need to listen to me. There are explosive devices planted throughout the palace, set to detonate during tonight's state dinner. We're here to prevent an attack, not to carry one out." Morrison's response was immediate and skeptical. "Marcus Webb, you are wanted for the attempted assassination of Princess Charlotte. Anything you say now will be considered part of your terrorist activities." Commander Phillips stepped forward, his decades of service and reputation carrying weight even in this chaotic situation. "David, it's me, James Phillips. I know this situation is unprecedented, but you need to trust me on this. We have evidence of a conspiracy that reaches into Parliament and our own organization. The attack on Charlotte was just the beginning." The security chief hesitated, recognizing Phillips as a respected colleague and mentor. However, protocol demanded that he treat the entire group as hostile until the situation could be properly assessed. "Commander, with respect, you're wanted for questioning in connection with security breaches. I can't simply take your word that this is some kind of rescue operation." Sarah Mitchell pulled out the digital camera containing photographs of the unauthorized electrical modifications they had discovered. "Look at these images. Someone has been making changes to the palace infrastructure for months, installing remote detonation systems connected to explosive devices. We can prove everything we're saying." Captain Hayes remained silent during the confrontation, knowing that her presence will be the most difficult to explain. As a civilian contractor with no official authorization to be in the palace tunnels, she would likely face the most serious criminal charges if this situation went wrong. The stalemate was broken by an urgent radio transmission from the Palace Communications Center. "All security units, we have confirmed electromagnetic interference affecting communication systems throughout the East Wing. Unknown source, investigating possible cyber attack in progress." Morrison pressed his radio to respond, but Phillips interrupted him urgently. "That interference is preventing the terrorists from remotely detonating their explosives. If you restore normal communications, dozens of world leaders and members of the royal family will die within minutes." The security chief faced an impossible decision. His training and protocols demanded that he arrest the unauthorized personnel and restore normal security operations immediately. However, the people he had captured included respected colleagues who were making extraordinary claims about an imminent terrorist attack. "You have 60 seconds to convince me," Morrison said grimly. "After that, I'm following standard procedures regardless of the consequences." Marcus spoke quickly but clearly, outlining the evidence they had gathered about Operation Crownfall. He described the conspiracy involving Lord Pemberton, Defense Secretary Hartley, and other high-ranking officials. He explained how the attack on Princess Charlotte had been designed to distract attention from the real threat. Most importantly, he provided specific details about the explosive devices they had discovered and the remote detonation systems that were currently being disrupted by Captain Hayes's interference equipment. Phillips supported Marcus's account by providing intelligence about the New Britannia movement and their plans to eliminate the royal family during the state dinner. He showed Morrison classified documents that proved the conspiracy's reach into Parliament and the military establishment. Sarah added her analysis of the evidence they had collected during their investigation, including the suspicious death of Lord Pemberton and the pattern of unauthorized access to classified royal security information. When they finished their urgent briefing, Morrison was quiet for several long moments. As a career security professional, he knew that the evidence they had presented was too detailed and specific to be fabricated. The electromagnetic interference affecting the palace systems was also consistent with their claims about preventing remote detonation. "Assuming you're telling the truth," Morrison said slowly, "what do you need from me?" "Evacuate the state dinner immediately," Phillips replied. "Create a medical emergency or security alert that requires moving all the guests to a secure location outside the palace. Then bring in bomb disposal teams to search for and disarm the explosive devices we've identified." Morrison shook his head. "I can't evacuate world leaders based on the word of wanted fugitives, no matter how convincing your story might be. The political and diplomatic consequences would be enormous if this turned out to be false information." "Then let us prove it to you." Captain Hayes spoke for the first time. "I can show you exactly where the explosive devices are located and demonstrate that they're connected to remote detonation systems. Give me 15 minutes with proper scanning equipment, and I'll provide evidence that no one can dispute." The security chief considered his options carefully. Standard protocol required him to arrest the intruders and restore normal operations, but the potential consequences of ignoring their warnings were catastrophic. If they were telling the truth about the explosive devices, then following protocol would result in the deaths of dozens of innocent people. "Sergeant Williams," Morrison called to one of his officers, "escort these individuals to the security command center. I want them under guard at all times, but I also want them to have access to our scanning equipment so they can prove their claims." The group was escorted through the tunnel system to a secure elevator that carried them to the Palace Security Center. The command center was a modern facility filled with surveillance monitors, communication equipment, and tactical planning resources. Banks of screens showed feed from cameras throughout the palace, including real-time footage of distinguished guests arriving for the state dinner. Captain Hayes immediately went to work with the palace's explosive detection equipment, using advanced scanners to map the location of every suspicious device they had discovered in the tunnel system. The results appeared on large displays that everyone in the command center could see clearly. "There," she said, pointing to the screen showing the state dining room. "Explosive charges are positioned beneath the floor at these 6 locations, connected by the electrical modifications we found in the tunnels. Each device contains enough material to bring down a significant portion of the building. Similar patterns appeared on screens showing the music room, the grand staircase, and other areas where the evening's events were scheduled to take place. The sophistication and scope of the terrorist plan became undeniably clear to everyone watching the demonstration. Morrison studied the evidence carefully before making his decision. "I'm ordering an immediate evacuation of the East Wing," he announced. "Medical emergency protocols tell the guests that a gas leak has been detected, and we need to move them to the West Wing as a precautionary measure." The evacuation began within minutes, with palace staff calmly, but firmly directing world leaders and royal family members to secure areas away from the explosive devices. The cover story about a gas leak was accepted without question, as such incidents were not uncommon in older buildings with complex utility systems. Bomb disposal experts arrived shortly after the evacuation was completed, confirming the presence of sophisticated explosive devices exactly where Marcus, Sarah, Phillips, and Captain Hayes had predicted. The bombs were more powerful than anyone had initially estimated. Their detonation would have completely destroyed the East Wing of Buckingham Palace and killed everyone in the target areas. While the bomb disposal teams worked to safely disarm the devices, Morrison authorized a broader investigation into the conspiracy that had been uncovered. Within hours, Defense Secretary Hartley and Colonel Morrison were arrested based on evidence provided by the investigation team. Other members of the conspiracy were identified and taken into custody before they could escape or destroy additional evidence. The state dinner was ultimately held 3 days later in the palace's West Wing, with additional security measures and modified protocols designed to prevent similar attacks in the future. The international guests were briefed on the situation and praised the professionalism of the British security services in preventing what could have been a devastating terrorist attack. Marcus Webb was officially exonerated of all charges related to the attempted assassination of Princess Charlotte. The investigation proved that he had been acting alone in his desperate attempt to expose the conspiracy, and that his actions, while misguided, had ultimately led to the prevention of a much more serious attack. His dismissal from the Royal Protection Unit was reversed, and he was offered reinstatement with full honors. However, Marcus declined the offer to return to his former position. The events of the past weeks had changed his perspective on life and his priorities. Instead, he accepted a position as a security consultant, working with Captain Hayes to help other organizations identify and prevent similar threats. Sarah Mitchell was promoted to Chief Inspector in recognition of her crucial role in uncovering and stopping the terrorist plot. Her willingness to risk her career in pursuit of the truth had saved countless lives and exposed a conspiracy that could have destabilized the British government. Commander Phillips retired from active duty, but remained as an advisor to the Royal Protection Service, helping to implement new security protocols designed to prevent future infiltration by hostile forces. His experience during Operation Crownfall became the basis for updated training programs for Royal Protection officers. The New Britannia movement was designated as a terrorist organization, and international law enforcement agencies worked together to identify and arrest remaining members of the group. The conspiracy had been more extensive than anyone initially realized, with cells operating in multiple countries and connections to other extremist organizations. Princess Charlotte, now 8 years old, continued her normal routine under enhanced but discreet security protection. The little girl remained unaware of how close she had come to being the victim of a terrorist attack, and her parents were determined to ensure that she could grow up as normally as possible despite the extraordinary circumstances surrounding her life. The lessons learned from Operation Crownfall led to significant reforms in royal security procedures, with new protocol for background checks, internal investigations, and coordination between different agencies. The conspiracy had succeeded initially because it exploited gaps in communication and oversight between various organizations responsible for protecting the royal family. 6 months later, Marcus Webb stood in the same garden at Kensington Palace where the crisis had begun, watching Princess Charlotte play under the watchful eyes of her protection detail. The scene looked identical to that October morning when he had pointed a rifle in her direction, but everything had changed. The little girl was safe, the conspiracy had been exposed, and justice had been served. As he prepared to leave the palace grounds for what would probably be the last time, Marcus reflected on the events that had brought him to this point. His attempt to seek revenge had inadvertently led to the prevention of a much greater tragedy. Sometimes, he realized, the most important victories come from the most unexpected directions. The autumn sun was setting over London as Marcus walked away from Kensington Palace, leaving behind a life of service to the crown, but taking with him the satisfaction of knowing that his actions had ultimately protected the innocent. Princess Charlotte's laughter echoed across the garden behind him, a sound that would forever remind him that some fights are worth winning, regardless of the personal cost. 7.